Hi everyone, it's Jim of Shiloh Kahal. Today I want to visit Genesis and Genesis 1 with respect to what it does and does not reveal to us about how a day works and when it starts. So what I've done here is I've created a document. It's an 8-page document, but it's not that big of a document. I'll show you why I say that. I've entitled it The Genesis Account of Creation, and here are the questions I'm posing in this and what I'm trying to cover here. Is the period of the day or the sequence of the day explicitly taught or stated in Scripture? Explicit would be clear, unequivocal, spelled out teaching to us. And then the follow-up question is, what is an evening and what is a morning? Well, I'll answer right now that I don't believe that Genesis does give us an explicit explanation of a day. It doesn't explicitly teach us anything. We're all going to have to infer and speculate with the information that we're provided, and everybody's going to have to make an assessment of what they believe is the best explanation for what Genesis is telling us about a day. And it wouldn't matter. And because I've made so many videos, some people might think I'm over focused on the day. I'm really not. I've just been investigating it, and it's led to a lot of videos. But at the end of the day, it matters only to me to the extent that I would like to celebrate the weekly Sabbath on the correct, start it at the correct time, whether it be evening or morning. And I would like to celebrate the various Moedim, which are the appointed times, at their correct time to the extent that we can. And so I'm going to have to parse out, when does a day begin so that I know how to keep the various Moedim. And I'll state really nowhere, not only does Genesis not explicitly teach what a day is, I contend that really nowhere in Scripture do we get explicit teaching or explanations of a day. I'll also say here before I get going that, evening and morning is introduced in Genesis and it's spoken of throughout Scripture, but we don't have a clear, explicit explanation of what an evening and morning is. Now, I've pieced it together. I've done some videos, and I'll just tell you quickly what I've pieced together. When we say evening and morning, sometimes we think of it. I think it causes us to, we all conjure different things, but I'm going to specify. I think that it's likely that in the evening if you were taking an evening to evening day, if you believe that scriptures are teaching you that the day begins in the evening, and so you start your Sabbath in the evening, then you're going to have to pick a starting point for that. I think that is the sunset. I think most people think of it as the sunset because as soon as the sun first goes below the horizon, you would be starting a new day. What follows that technically is twilight, which is that period of time where sunlight remains in the sky and we have some light, but it wanes. First we have the civil twilight, then we have the nautical, then we have the astronomical twilight, and then we have dusk or astronomical dusk, and then we go into night or darkness. But people often think of that process as evening. I think it gets a little confusing when we get to Leviticus in a few passages because we don't have it really solidified. Because evening can colloquially be, you could start it before the sun goes down and you could run it past dusk once it becomes night. So I think you need to, if you're going to engage in the conversation of when a day begins, I think you need to decide upon a point that is reasonable to you and operate from it. Now, if you fall to the morning to morning, if you favor that as a better explanation, well, morning is also a problem. You're going to see morning as a problem in Genesis 1 here. But we say morning, but it also, that can mean so many different things if you've watched some of my other videos. I think we need to be more explicit that I think if you believe that the day starts in the morning hours, in the first part, you know, I think you need to pick sunrise, the moment that the sun crests the horizon and we get that first sliver of sunlight. I think you need to pick that as your start of the day. And what we immediately go into could be called colloquially morning, but I really think it's day now because once the sun crests the sky, we enter into the new day, and the first part of that day is day. Because morning, and I'll show you, we're going to see it here in this what I'm doing today. Morning is actually that period of time that starts with dawn. You start with night, and from night you go into dawn, which is the first appearance of daylight in the sky. It's the sun's not come to the horizon yet, and it's still a little ways from the horizon, but its daylight is starting to appear in the sky, and that's called dawn. First, you have astronomical dawn, called dawn, and then we have a period of twilight, which technically would be the astronomical twilight, and then the nautical, and then the civil twilight before the sun actually crests the horizon or comes up over the horizon. That is also commonly called daybreak. We think of sometimes we think of daybreak as that time when the sun breaks the horizon, but really daybreak occurs when the light first appears in the sky and ends when the sun crest or first comes up over the horizon and we get that first glimpse of sun. Well, that ends daybreak. So, and then we start a day. So really, technically, morning is the twilight period of time before the sun comes up. And it would also be the very last part of the previous day because the new day starts when the sun comes up. So the very last part of any day, if this is the position you embrace, would be morning. Evening would be right in the middle of the day. Morning would be at the end of the day. Okay, so with that, let's get started. I have to first start with, the fact that we have Genesis starts describing that telling us that the earth was created, the heavens and the earth were created, but they were without form and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Okay, so I have, just to explain this, in this first on this first page here, before day one, I've selected 3 different passages: New King James Version, Septuagint, and the Yah Scriptures. I've specifically selected the Septuagint to evaluate in this, and then Yah Scriptures are the scriptures I tend to read from. But the New King James is representative of pretty much all of the various translations and modern translations. But I will not be reading these each time. I'm going to present them on the pages you're going to see, and you're welcome to read them, but you could pull them out of your own. This is just Genesis 1. You could pull it out of your own Bible. I'm really not going. You're going to see that I put the scriptures, every one of the scriptures for Genesis, and all 3 of these versions on each of these pages, but I'm not going to go through them for the reasons I just said. I'm really going to pretty much sum it up you're going to see here, I've got this explicit, here. I'm using this explicit. I'm going to basically say this is what was explicitly just told us in the scriptures without inferring anything. That's my goal in this part. So the very first thing we've got to then address is the fact that God created heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep. The spirit of Elohim hovered. You know what? This is. Let me just go back up here and read the New King James. See if I can take a little different approach. I'm going to read the New King James. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So what it explicitly told us, and it's really going to be true of all the 3 of these versions, is that God created the heaven and earth. It was without form and it was empty. Darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim hovered or moved or was moving over the face of the waters. That's it. That's all it tells us in the very beginning. Now, you'll see I've put here, this is intended to be in each of the, when I get to day one, you're going to see that I'm going to illustrate the day on a timeline that was started, and this would be the beginning of the timeline, and this would be the end of the timeline. Now, in this, because the earth was without form and void, well, we don't know how long. We could speculate, we can infer, but we don't know how long the earth was formed or without form and empty. Was it, who knows? Was it more than a day? Was it a century? Was it who knows? It could also be part of the day. I'm not really trying to over infer anything that it was more than anything other than part of that first day also. But I didn't depict it here, although it needs to be included in there. So let's move off of before day one and get to day one. And so here we are in day one. And you can see a little more of what I was talking about, how I've taken a day, and I'll just start here. In this illustration, this is the first part. We're going to go from left to right, illustrating the time of a day. And then I'm going to, okay. So I'll read the New King James very quickly. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good. And God divided the light from darkness. And God called the light day, and darkness he called night. So the evening and morning were the first day. And the Septuagint and the Y'all Scriptures read something pretty closely, but the Septuagint says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. And the Y'all Scripture says, and there came to be evening and there came to be morning, day one. I'm not sure what drives everybody in the translations to come up with different things. But here's what was explicitly just told us in all three of these passages. Elohim, or God, said, let there be light, and there was. He saw that it was good. He divided or separated the light from darkness, and he called light day and darkness night, and then evening or morning were, either they existed or came to be, or they came to be, it doesn't really matter, suddenly they appear on us. Evening and morning were or came to be, and after this statement was the first day or day one. Okay. So, a couple things about that, the explicit statements. First of all, the activities of this day one. What were they? The activities of the day, he created light, he divided light from the dark and called light day and dark night. That's the activities of the day. So here's an illustration of what that might look like. If this would be the daylight period, this would be the creation of the light that he called day. Now, I've divided it into 12 hours, but I don't know, especially here at the beginning, who knows? I'm left to infer and speculate that it was 12 hours. I don't know. What I do know is that he created light he created light and called it day, and he separated it from the darkness, and which he called night, and he introduced for us evening, and he introduced for us morning. Now this is how I've illustrated here. Day, because this is the activity where he created the light and called it day, and then the night, the darkness, which it hasn't gone away. It looks like it must be the original darkness, and then the evening and the morning. Okay, so let me introduce here, and I'm going to introduce it here, some of the inferences. Since we don't have explicit statements, we're going to have to infer a few things about this. First of all, I think it's safe to infer that there are 4 components to every day. Doesn't say that explicitly, but I don't know how it could be something else, although I'm game if somebody can show it to me. There are 4 components. There is a period of light called day. There is a period of darkness called night. There is an evening, and there is a morning. Those are the 4 components. Now what do we do? Where do we put those 4? How do we organize? What's the sequence of these 4 days? And we're going to this is where we don't know. This is where the argument is. Because one of the inferences is that, first of all, the first inference I've laid here is my inference. This is what I take from it. This is what I speculate and infer from the passage. There was a period of a day in which there were the activities, and it comes first. And then it's followed by the evening, which is what I'm depicting here. Here's the day and the activities that happen in the day where he created the light, followed by evening, which we don't really have any definition of what it is. I've illustrated it as though we have the civil, nautical, and astronomical twilight, but I have no idea if that would be a fair representation of it. I just don't even know. Maybe it has to be different, or wouldn't be identified differently, or at least that's, again, I'm inferring and speculating. It has to be different than day or night. Same with morning. It has to be different, or it wouldn't be separated. So anyway, we have the daylight period of time where the activity occurs, then we have the evening, and then we have darkness and night that separates evening and morning. I suppose, and we'll get into it in a second. Well, here, we'll just move on to the next inference here, because the next inference is really the evening for the folks who believe that scriptures in Genesis 1 are teaching us that a day starts in the evening and ends in the evening, because it reads like, so the evening and the morning were the first day. So they think this represents the, This represents the, let me see if I can fix that. So they, because it says, so there was evening and there was morning, they think it's telling us that the day starts a day. But what they're really saying here, and here's the inference that I'm using here, it's in the evening and the morning comprises the day, so that the evening comes first in the first part of the day. But if you just stay with that, that suggests that this comes first. And I guess you could go with a different order, but I don't know how you would, because what follows evening is not morning. Are you going to speculate that morning is right behind evening, or is it split in some way? And if it's split, is it split by darkness, or is it split by daylight? I think most people who read this, I'm speculating here, but most people who read this and see that it says, so the evening and the morning were the first day, they think that this and this really is separated by this. So they think that this whole period, this begins the day, and then we go into darkness, and then we have morning. But they're missing in that environment, they're missing the day, or in that context, they're missing the day. Where is the day in that? If there was evening and there was morning and there was something in between those two, where's the daylight if that's darkness? It's really not addressed. I think it makes it a questionable explanation, but this is the one that prevails. This is the one that is being shared and over and over again. As I have presented videos and I'm getting comments, I get people saying it clearly teaches in Genesis that the day starts with evening. And I don't think it clearly teaches that at all. In fact, that would be a very unclear teaching of Genesis. I think it more clearly teaches that the day starts with the daybreak, sunrise. Here's another, and I'll share it here. I've heard, but I've not really addressed it too much. There are some people who are saying that darkness pre-existing light, and nobody can argue with that, because that's what we got up here. Darkness was on the face of the earth, and the earth was form and void and empty. So we have this period of darkness and void. Well, they might take that darkness and voidness and apply it to the first part of the day. And if I was going to I could maybe make this first part dark, and then in the middle of that first part of the day, they created light. And then the argument is, since darkness preceded the light in creation, which I guess, it doesn't say that he created the darkness, but we assume that he has. We presume, we infer that he also created the darkness, and that I agree that then darkness, it pre-existed the creation of light. So the first thing that was there was darkness. But was the fact that darkness was there and pre-existed light, does that necessarily mean that in the context of a day 1, 2, 3, 4, that we have to then consider that darkness pre-existed in each of those days? Maybe that's what they're arguing. Darkness pre-existing light and came first, making it first part of the day. So I guess when they are reading evening to morning, they are also embracing then that this would become the first part of a day and darkness would precede. Then they must get into a morning because morning then follows night. So they would have 1, 2, 3, 4, with the daylight being the last activity of a day. But this is also an inferment. This is inferred. This is speculated. This is, although they feel pretty solid in it. So I say the first thing that happens is the day, then evening, then night, and then morning, which is the twilight period before the sun comes up. Sorry. Okay. And then others who say evening to evening are pretty much saying, evening. They don't really talk about darkness, although they have to infer, but they're also saying this is number one. First thing happens is evening, then there must be darkness, even though I don't hear them talking about it too much. And the third thing would be morning, and then the fourth thing would be morning. And those who are asserting the same thing, that day starts with the evening, but starts with the idea that the darkness has to come first because it preceded the light. Okay. But I want to also define speculate. Speculating is forming a theory or conjecture about a subject without firm evidence. And in other videos, I've made the case that in the absence of explicit, which is what I'm doing here, in the absence of an explicit explanation or instruction, we are left to infer or speculate on explanations and instructions. In the absence of explicit explanations and instructions, everything else is inferred and speculated. All of it is. So everybody who says that we have clear teaching or says we have explicit teaching, you're going to have to find the explicit statements somewhere, which I have not found in my search so far. So let me read this statement. Let me just read it to you, because this is part of what drives why I'm making this video and what I'm really saying. So let me just read it to you. In the absence of explicit explanation or instruction, inferred or speculated explanations and instructions then compete for clarity, which is the quality of being coherent and intelligible, or clearness or lucidity as to perception or understanding, freedom from indistinctness or ambiguity. Excuse me, I meant ambiguity. And they compete for simplicity, which I then have put in here Occam's razor, which is that plurality should not be posited without necessity. The principle gives precedence to simplicity. Of two competing theories, the simpler explanation of an entity is to be preferred. The principle is also expressed as entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity. And then this should have actually been, I'm sorry, forgive me. They are both competing for the right to say something is clearly stated or explicitly stated. So let me restate that. In the absence of an explicit explanation or instruction, then inferred and speculated explanations or instructions are competing for clarity and for simplicity. So the ones that provide the most clarity and the ones who provide the most simplicity, according to Occam's razor, and really just, I think, rational thought, the ones that are more clear and more simple are more likely to be the correct explanation. So in the absence of just explicit, we're going to have to decide which inferred and speculated explanation makes the best sense to make everything be more clear and simple. Now, I'm going to put this, you're going to see this, all of this at the end of each day, but we're not going to read it every time. I just put it there for reference if we need it or something as we go. Okay, so let's move off of day 1 here and move to day 2. In day 2, I'll quickly read the New King James. Then God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide waters from waters. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. So the evening and the morning were the second day. Okay, so what was explicitly stated, and by the way, I mean, you can read them for yourself, but the Septuagint and y'all scriptures worded differently, but it's the same. And I'm going to say it now so I don't have to keep saying it with each day. They are all three in agreement, and most of the translations we read will mostly be in agreement, uh, especially from the perspective that I'm talking about. Now, we can get into other topics of Genesis 1, which are not my it's not my objective today. I don't really want to talk about what the firmament is, and um, there are topics we can get into that are not my point today. I do want to quickly go back and visit day one. First of all, when he created light and we had evening and we have darkness, you're going to see he's done this and we have light without sun, because we do not have on day one the creation of the two great lights, which would be the sun to rule the day or the moon to rule the night. So just keep that in mind because we're going to introduce this later. So whatever's creating this light and whatever's creating evening is not this. First of all, evening and morning may not have looked the same on the first 2 or 3 days of creation as it ended up looking once the sun was brought onto the scene. So, okay. All right. So what was explicitly stated on day two is that Elohim said, "Let there be an firmament or expanse to divide the waters," and then he made it and did divide the waters. And he called the firmament or expanse the heavens or Shemayim. So what were the activities of the day? He created the firmament and expanse and divided the waters into those under and those above the firmament. Now let's think this through. When did he do this? Did he create the firmament during the daytime hours when we're dealing with light, or did he do it in the darkness? Did he create the firmament in what he called darkness, or did he create the firmament during the time period that he called day? There's no explicit instruction. But I think most of us would imagine that he did it in the light. So he created the firmament. And I would also say what seems evident to me is that you get up. This is the sequence of a day. The first thing that happens is the sun has crested the sky and we've started, well, the sun's not created yet. Let me get that back out of here. So we have light appearing. Light begins and we start the day and we start our work. All of us work during the daylight hours. So Elohim would have worked, created the firmament during what we call day, which are the time. Come evening, that's the time where you start winding it down and you go into darkness, which for us is when we sleep. So we wind it down in the evening. We go to sleep in the darkness and we sleep through the darkness. Some of us might start waking up at the beginning of daybreak when the sunlight appears, but we're all getting up usually somewhere around related to the rising of the sun. Okay, so we have the explicit statement about day two that he created the firmament. I am inferring and speculating that he did it during the daylight hours, which would have been and it's the first thing that he taught after we move off of day one, where it says, and evening and morning were a day, the first day. When we move off of that, the very next thing he says is nothing about an evening. The very first thing he says at the end of day one is that he then started work on the firmament. So it seems apparent that the first thing he did would be make the firmament, which seems reasonable to infer that he would have done it in the daylight. So the whole thing seems reasonable to me to infer and speculate that on day two, the light appears, he gets busy and he does his work. He creates the firmament, and then evening comes. Did he stop working? Probably. I don't really know. It didn't explicitly say, so I don't know that. But it sure seems like that's the pattern. Did he? And if he didn't quit working and stop when it got night, then he would have been working in the darkness. And then I suppose that the argument for the first thing he did the first thing that happens is a day, because the first thing he did was create. Because that's all the scripture says, is that he let there was a firmament, he made the firmaments, and then so the evening and the morning were the second day. So after he makes the firmament, he goes on to say, so the evening and the morning were the second day. So if he made the firmament in the daylight period here, and then you take this, so then there was evening, and then there was morning, the second day. Well, what does that infer? There's no infer, or what does that imply, I should say? Does it imply that there's no work taking place between evening and morning? I don't know. Looks like he clearly did all the work first, and then there was evening, and then there was morning. Okay, then I've got the definitions I had read earlier. Let's go to the third day, because really I've already made the entire argument, or the purpose of this video has already been done. I'm just going to now, for formality, go through the rest of the days and hopefully quickly, talk about the rest of the days, because the same pattern is true in all of them. So let's read the New King James Version. Then God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. You know what? Forgive me. I'm not going to read it, because I've summarized it here, and you can test what I've summarized against what you can read in your own version and translation. But the explicit instructions is that during day 3, Elohim said, let the waters be gathered and dry land appear. And then it was so. He called the dry ground earth, and he called the gathering of the waters seas. He saw that it was good. Then he said, let earth bring forth grasses, herbs, and fruit trees. And it was so. He saw that this was good. Now all I did was quickly bullet point and summarize each of the things that you can read here in order, and focusing on the things that he either said or did, because that's what was explicitly taught. So what were the activities of day 3? He collected the waters together, creating dry ground or earth, and the waters in the seas, and he commanded the earth to bring forth plants. That's the essence of the day. When did he do that? Well, if you go up here, we talk about all the work that I just described, and he saw that it was good, and then there was evening, and then there was morning, the third day. So it sure looks like he did all that work here, and then there was evening, and then there was morning, the third day, and then you'd have to infer or imply that darkness was between, a period of time was between the evening and morning, and probably night. I mean, it seems reasonable. This pattern seems reasonable to me. The day begins with the work called day the day begins with work occurring during the day when when there's light, and then we have evening, and then we don't talk about darkness, but it probably have the darkness, and then we have morning, and then we have day 3. All right, let's move on to day 4. Again, I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to go to the explicit statements that I pulled out of it, and pretty much reads like this. On day 4, Elohim said, let there be lights in the firmament to divide day from night, to be for signs and seasons, for day and for days, or days and years, to be for lights in the firmament, to give light on earth. He made 2 great lights, the greater one to rule the day and the lesser one to rule the night, and he made the stars. They were placed in the firmament to shine upon the earth and to regulate day and night, to divide between light and darkness. He saw good. Those are all the explicit statements of Genesis with respect to day 4. All of them are explicit statements, nothing inferred there. So then what does that look like? He gets up and he starts creating. And when does he do that? It's the first thing he does. And is he doing that in the daytime? I don't know. Sure seems like, to me, it seems reasonable to think that he's doing it during the day, during the light. This is the day of activity. This is the pattern we have in life. This is the way we all live. We do our work during the daytime. We don't do any work at nighttime. And then, like he says in the other scriptures, so the evening and the morning were the 4th day. So after he gets done with all the work he does, we then have evening, and we have morning, and the end of that day, which happens to be day 4 now. Doesn't mention the day, darkness, or the night, but you have to almost infer or assume it's implied that the darkness does separate the evening and the morning, because that's what we see now. We just see it. Okay, and this is also the day when we introduce the sun. So this is when whatever daylight we have now, whatever light we have that is called day, maybe the sun isn't the only component of that light we see. I really don't know. I could only infer and speculate, and I wouldn't have anything strong to be speculating on that. But you wonder, because we had in days 1, 2, 3, we had light without the sun. Now that we have the sun, we presume, maybe it's fair to presume that all of the daylight comes from the sun. But we know when we get to Revelation, there's a time when, the light that we're going to be operating from will not come from the sun or the moon, because it's going to come from our Elohim again. So I don't know. But what I do know is that it's on this day that the sun was created and the moon was created. That's clear. That's evident. That's explicit. What is implied, or in my opinion, and I'm restating here, but what seems to be the reasonable Occam's razor approach to this, is that the first thing we have is work done in the day, and then we have evening, and then we have darkness or night, and then we have morning. Go to day 5. And I'll just summarize it. On day 5, Elohim said, "Let the waters abound with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth." He created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moved on the water, and the birds that flew in the air. He saw that it was good, and he commanded them to multiply. So once again, the activities of the day. He starts the day with making the sea creatures and the birds and commanding them to be fruitful. And then we have evening. Then we have morning, day 5. So the evening and the morning for day 5. So here's all the work taking place. And then we have evening, then we have morning, day 5. So the pattern seems to be reasonably inferred. The reasonable implication, the reasonable speculation is that the first thing that happened is all the activity, and it took place in the daytime. Then we have evening. Then we have evening. Then we have morning. And in between that, we had night. Again, going back to the, I think, strong speculation that we have 4 components of the day: day, evening, darkness, and night. Now, I will say that, let me go back to day 4 here, because looking at the evening and the morning, what we understand to be twilight, both in the evening, where we start with civil and move through to astronomical, because the sun is moving away from us and below the horizon or past the horizon. And in the morning, it's approaching us, it's approaching the horizon and moving toward us, where then we start with the astronomical twilight, the nautical, the civil twilight, before we get day sunrise. Now I think, at least on day 4, that we can presume that at least in day 4, we begin seeing evening and morning as we are accustomed to seeing it today. Can't really say whether or not days 1, 2, 3, the evening and morning, looked like they do today, because we did not have the sun and the moon to create those twilight periods. Okay, so covered day 5. Let's go to day 6, and that's a big one, but I'll summarize it for you. Basically, on day 6, let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to their kind. And it came to be. He made the beast, cattle, and creeping things according to their kinds, and saw it was good. Then he said, "Let us make man according to our image and likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish, birds, cattle, and all the earth, and every creeping thing." He made man in his image, male and female. He blessed them and told them to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish, birds, and all creatures of earth. He told them he'd given them every plant that bears seed for food. So in the moment, he had not given them animals to eat. He says he gave them every plant that bears seed for food. And then he goes on to say that for every beast of the earth, every bird, and every creeping thing, everything with the breath of life, every green plant was for food. So it appears that on day 6 and in the creation, we were commanded to eat the plants that were seed bearing, like vegetables and fruits, the seed bearing and herbs and grasses. So we were commanded to eat those. But when it says, but the birds or the animals were also commanded to eat plants, but it was every green plant. So that's why we see them maybe eating grass, and we see them maybe eating tree, leaves and different things. So they would have green plants to eat that we would not necessarily share in. But the point I would make is, there's a difference in the kind of plant that we are each eating, us versus the beasts and the birds and the creeping things. But all of us were eating plant. And then we go on to say, and it came to be so, and Elohim saw saw all that he made and declared it very good. So what were the activities of the day? He created all the creatures, including man, and commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. And I didn't put it in here, but he also instructed them what to eat. So again, going back to the pattern, what did he do? He started the day by all this activity. He did all this creation. And then, after he got done, then there was evening, and then there was morning, the sixth day. So following all that activity is evening, morning, the first day, and between them should be that period of time called night or darkness. So the pattern remains the same over and over and over again. Then I do just mention quickly that the end of day 6, thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished. Okay. And then I move on to day 7, where it basically says, I'll just do the explicit, what you can read about it again, and that is that in all of the translations, and that is that Elohim, or God, completed his work which he'd done, and he rested the 7th day from his work. And he blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, making it Kodesh, which is just the Hebrew word to describe this set apartness, this holiness, this sanctification. What he did with this 7th day after having completed the work is he made it very special, set it apart, different than everything else. And that's why it's one of the reasons I think most of Christendom understands this 7th day as it was given to us in this creation, that it's supposed to be special. But I don't think we realize until we start really focusing on the old writings just how important it is to him that we keep this day that he has made Kodesh, because it is his Kodesh people, Israel, that he's commanded to keep the Sabbath. Nobody else is commanded to keep the Sabbath, just him. That are them and us, and that's how we are identified as his people. It's all very important, but if you read the old writings, you'll get that. You'll come to see it if you spend a lot of time there. Okay, so the activities of the day, well, none. He rested, but he did set the 7th day apart and declared it special. But again, now here we don't really talk about activities, so I can only presume, and I'm not going to do it here, but we could almost presume that we still had the same pattern, that, what he rested on, what he didn't. Well, okay, you know what, maybe this would be good, because where he would normally be working first in the day, he's actually resting now. So during this daylight period of time, resting. Yes, that's important, I guess, that that would be happening in the daylight period of time, because I think this also sets the pattern of our Sabbath, and that we are really, the essence of our Sabbath, so that we're resting during what would otherwise be the work time, which are the daylight hours of a day. Okay. And then we have evening, and then we have morning, and I believe that's all I really need to cover here. So the point of this video is to really just affirm that we have no explicit instructions regarding a day in Genesis, Leviticus, Exodus, Gospels. Nowhere do we have an explicit account, and we certainly don't have one in Genesis that tells us explicitly what the sequence of the day is or the period of the day is. It doesn't do it. And it doesn't explicitly tell us what evening and morning is. We are left to speculate or infer from the information we have. And then we're going to have to deal with the competing speculations, the inferred speculations. You have to decide which one really makes more sense, which one would be most clear, make the day most clear, and which one of them would satisfy Occam's razor most readily, which I contend is this pattern of light being day, then evening, then darkness being night. All right, thank you, and may you be Baruch.